Good day, I'm Nic Human. I'm a contemporary impressionist painter, and I'll be showing you how I'm painting this green sea turtle and how I create that sense of distance underwater and that feeling of balance within the composition. I hope you enjoy. So I have prepared the palette for paint beforehand, and there's the titanium white, the lemon yellow, the yellow ochre, the cadmium red, the burnt sienna, carmine red. For both of those, the reds, that's why I'm using the gloves, and it's because of the toxic, the cadmium and the cobalt in there. The burnt sienna, carmine red, the French ultramarine, phthalo blue, and the phthalo green. I'll be relying quite a bit in this painting on those two. The color mixing is very important when you're painting in a very direct technique or style. It helps you to then just put the colors down as they are. In these mixtures, I have gone from dark to light. So the color of the water, there are gradations, starting with the blue that is really a mixture of ultramarine, phthalo blue, and a bit of burnt sienna to mute it a little bit. Then it becomes greener as it becomes lighter. So here in the next section is the phthalo blue with some phthalo green and some white that I'm adding in, and then more of the phthalo green coming through in that mixture with more white. And then where it becomes lighter, closer to the light source, there's a little bit of lemon yellow, some phthalo green, and a little bit of the burnt sienna just to warm it up, because your eye is moving closer to the direct sunlight that you'll be having. A color that I really like and enjoy is the bright white that you can get from the titanium white with just a little bit of the scarlet lake. The green turtle, there are two subspecies. One of the two subspecies, the one is a bluish type of color. The other one has got more reds in it. So this orange, this gradation here that I've created would be for those colors at the top of the green turtle, as well as the purple, the dark purple. The shadows underwater tend to be cooler than it is typically for things above water, where there's a lot of reflective light. So the purple here would be for the darker part, the deepest parts of the turtle that you can have, the markings underneath the flippers, around the neck and so forth, and then just a muted gray, a gray-green type of color that I've used there. So this is the mixture that I've thought through the composition when I created them, and that will help me just to jump in and create the painting. I mostly work with palette knives and some brushes. I tend to do my color mixing with this bigger one. It's not so big for this painting, and then a finer one that I can work the detail in. Then also these wider brushes, almost a 1-inch brush, the filbert brush and the finer brush for the details. Those are really just what I will work through, but most of the work, the heavy lifting, is done with the palette knives that I tend to work with. It's what gives it texture. Applying the paint as well as in just taking it off as well. I'll be starting the canvas, working from a few photographs and a painting I've done before as well that I will explore with this one. So at the moment I'm putting in the colors around the sea turtle, and it's really just to create a silhouette in a way of this one. So what I'm basically applying at the moment is a mixture of the phthalo blue, some burnt sienna, with a little bit of phthalo green in there, worked in there as well. And it's really just to set the sort of the darker part of the water. I have created a vignette in a way, a gradation that starts with the darker end is the phthalo blue that becomes paler or lighter towards phthalo green, as it would be lifting higher up, and the light that will be shining on the carapace, there'll also be some light coming in from the top and more direct light here that you will see coming through. So it's all about this movement of light coming through. That will be your brightest light flooding in here and on that high at the top of the carapace as well. So at this stage of the painting, I mix it in with a impasto medium. I've drawn the canvas, so I've used the orange that is a mixture of the yellow, burnt sienna, and red. I've drawn this with a finer brush with a phthalo blue, and that is just giving me the drawing that enable me to paint over it. And you'll see some of the drawing. I'll be able to see it as I'm painting through as well. The smaller fish I will keep in the painting, but I'm not too worried. I can paint them back in again, so it's fine if I lose some of that detail. At the moment, I'm relying on the phthalo blue, but it's a very strong pigment, and as it is moving towards green, and lighter as well, towards the top, that's the general movement. There's a larger gradation happening from dark to light, from blue towards green, and yellow and white here as well. So I'm just thinking of that as I'm painting all the way through. It's quite an intuitive process, but generally I keep it quite expressive for that color to move through. I've spent a lot of time with the sea turtles back in South Africa, at the aquariums, the hatching, the nesting. And so I've learned a lot over time about their anatomy, about how they move. In this painting specifically, it's a green sea turtle. So at the moment, for me, that color that surrounds it is quite important. And it's really preliminary. I will then start to work in the detail and the larger shapes of the sea turtle itself as well. But the movement of the light in the water is the most important. So you'll see that I'm moving towards the paler colors at the top. That is really the phthalo green, the titanium white. The lemon yellow works really well for the light underwater. Here it's actually quite nice that the color of the canvas is coming through of that underpainting, because it's almost the same values and it's creating that feeling of light coming through. So at this point I'm losing the blues in a way. I've got less of that blue, of that phthalo blue. The thing with phthalo blue is it's a wonderful color in the water, but it's also a very strong pigment. So you have to be a little bit careful with it. It can easily dominate the scene. So I built up some texture underneath the underpainting and the drawing with gesso. That just creates a bit of spontaneity and movement of the colors. So at the moment I'm working in some highlights. That is really just the white and the scarlet lake. It's a red, and it just creates that warmth that you need, as if it feels like light coming in. If you add that to the titanium white, then it creates that feeling of light, together with even that orange coming through as well. That creates that feeling of the light coming in. And some of that darker color that you see at the bottom would be reflecting back up again. It's the phthalo blue, the burnt sienna. At the moment I'm using that just as that color that's coming through, that's bouncing back from underneath. So they're the two subspecies of the green turtles. So the one that I'm working from is more the blue-gray, but I've decided to add in some of that orange, that red into this one because of all the blues that go around it. The thing with painting sea turtles and drawing them is that they're actually very difficult to draw and paint, and it takes a little while to get used to it. But then to paint that in a spontaneous and energetic way is also something that takes a little bit of practice. But for me, it's always a priority, always lies with creating that energy, that feeling of movement, that life that it has. So at the moment, the mixture I'm using is more the burnt sienna and some of that carmine red that is cooler and darker than the other colors that I'm using. I begin to use some of that red and the pink and orange that is sort of that light that is coming in. So what you have here is you've got the sea turtle is in the foreground and the local color is still visible. You know, as you move further away in the water, the light and the colors are influenced by these blues, and the shadows are the first to drop away, but then the highlights you would still see. So at the moment I'm painting these reds. Red is the first wavelength that would disappear underwater as it moves further away. But because this is the closest, you can still see it. Okay, so what I'm going to work on now is basically the light that would be bouncing back under the carapace. I might be using a brush soon, just to make sure that the coverage happens well enough. So you'll see that it becomes more sort of muted green color, and it's really that light that's bouncing back from the ground of the water typically that you would see that would create that color. And I'm neutralizing it using the ultramarine and the burnt sienna. The thing with why I'm working with a palette knife, and at the beginning it feels awkward, it feels almost difficult, but it's for that purpose that I do that, because it creates that sense of spontaneity. I feel like I can always go in with a brush and I will tighten it up and create the detail, but preserving that energy is the most difficult part of it for me. So it feels genuine, it feels like that movement. That's what I'm always after. So this part of the turtle is actually quite white, but because it's on the shadow side and because it's under the water, it tends to be that green and that gray color coming through. There's also that light that bounces back from underneath. So this orange that you see underneath is closer to the actual highlight that you would see. And I scrape the color as well, because some of that light, that energy is what I'm trying to preserve as well. At the moment I'm painting the underside of the sea turtle, but I have to think about the shapes as well. The light coming in from the bottom, so there's an angle there. There's also the scales. There are different shapes that they have. There's a ridge there, there's a ridge there, and one that would be at that angle there. And then the outer scales as well, they would be going around that. I think I'm soon going to move onto the brush, which always makes my life a little bit easier, but then the danger is you have to be careful as well that you're not losing that feeling of energy. It's very easy to labor a painting, and that's what you always, this type of technique, you want to avoid that. There was a gouache painting that I did of a sea turtle a few years back, and it was the first sea turtle painting I did. It was just incredible for me to see how colors are influenced by water and underwater. At that time I was reading a lot of James Gurney's color theories, American illustrator. It just made a lot of sense for me at the time, because I was doing a lot of illustration work, digital illustration as well. It almost combined my love for painting with the practical work I was doing as an illustrator. I think because I was sensitized to it and I was thinking about light and colors and all these things, I think seeing it at the aquarium, I sort of saw it with new eyes. Yeah, and that just became very interesting to me. And I just loved how they can move so gracefully through water. I think that movement was just fascinating for me. It was also a time where I was getting back into surfing, so I just felt more connected to the ocean at that time again. And I also noticed at that time rays and dolphins and things sharing the waves with me. It was really the time where all of this started sort of taking shape. I was fascinated by the sea turtles, but as I was finding out more about them, because I was thinking maybe the subject matter interested me, I started noticing, this was back in 2018, they really are in trouble. You know, we hear a lot about it today, but at the time there wasn't, at least where I'm from in South Africa, there wasn't a lot of that talk, those things happening. The aquarium was putting out exhibits to make people aware. And as I was learning about them, I realized, like, oh wow, you know, they're in trouble. There's a lot of threat and things like that happening. I have to think about the side of the palette knife, because there's a sharp side. That sharp edge there is where the ridge would move back into shadow, but it would create that line, that harder line there. So I have to think about whether I'm applying it from the left hand or the right hand side. So with this specific ridge, I'm applying it from the left towards the right in order to create that mark that communicates that ridge. There's also, because of the shape, because that part, if you think about the light under the water bouncing back from the bottom up, there's that part, there's a curve. So that curve there, that part there, more light would be flooding, would be bouncing back onto that part than this part here. So I need to think about this part being a little bit lighter, as well as the side of this flipper here as well. So those are the parts that would be, the light would be bouncing back. And because of the light areas, I need to create the shadow parts as well. So at the moment, I'm using phthalo green with a lot of white. Phthalo green, when you mix it with white, almost looks like a blue. It's cool and it feels cool and fresh. Because of the whiteness of the turtles, there's a little bit of yellow in that, and that's why I'm adding a little bit of yellow ochre in there as well. So that part of the neck there would also be getting quite a bit of that light from underneath. And it's purely because the turtle that I photographed was swimming quite shallow, so the light underneath was bouncing back. I find that interesting because you've got two light sources. You've got the light source from the top, which I'll try and preserve. It's almost like I say, it's that orange of the canvas that is coming through there. That is the warm light, the direct light from the sunlight, but then you also have that reflective light. So I'm thinking about both of those at the same time, because there's a lot of the orange parts shining through there that you want that underpainting to feel like the light coming through, but there you won't have quite that much of that orange, of that light from the bottom. So I'm almost just filling up the gaps a little bit. I like it if there are some of that shining through. It adds to the spontaneity. It just gives it general shape to it. I've used phthalo blue as a drawing because it's a very strong pigment, but it's great because it shows underneath the painting for a long time after you've painted over it. It takes quite a bit of paint to cover it, so it helps for me to preserve the drawing. So I'm just now filling in little gaps here. Something I've really enjoyed seeing in this photograph that caught my attention, this turtle, was the fact that at the back there are these little ridges that caught the light. So yes, you'll have the light falling on the sea turtle from the top, but it's also shining through the scales. So it's almost like your nails or your ears. If there's light shining on them, light shines through them, it transmits through them. So it was the same there. It was quite delightful when I saw that, and I thought, I want to capture that in the painting as well. So at the moment, I'm just softening parts, just because there was a lot of that movement, but now the painting, you don't want it to be too much movement. You want to soften it a bit as well, so that it falls nicely on your eye. My strokes are short and swift, and like I said before, I always just want to preserve that energy in the strokes. I'm doing these quick movements so that I avoid laboring. I use the term labor, and a lot of painters use that term as well, and it really just means the colors become dull because you're working a lot of colors over each other, and then it looks boring. For some reason, my eyes are quite light sensitive. I grew up with that, and I think it's why I've had this long-term interest in this type of painting and light and things, is because of that experience of light. It's quite intense sometimes. It's that intensity, I think, is something I'm wanting to communicate in the paintings as well. I'm continuing with a bit of that color that's underneath there, but it's slightly darker than the scales in front of it. So I'm darkening it with ultramarine and burnt sienna. If you mix those together, it becomes a very neutral gray, just because you're going to have that light underneath there, and I'm going to have to lighten that part a little bit more. Then the green turtles have got these dark patches, so they would typically have dark patches on the far side of the front flippers and then at the back as well as they move in. So I'm going to just jot those in now. I'm using a type of purple color for that. Shadows tend to be purple underwater or bluish, which is different to how it is in, for instance, a landscape, where there's a lot of reflective light, much more from the earth bouncing back, so the shadows tend to be warm, but underwater they tend to be a type of purple. And the shadows you only really see in objects that are closer to you. If something moves away in distance, you'll lose your ability to see the shadows, but you will still be able to see the highlights. This is the top of the flipper, that's the bottom part of the flipper, so I just need to, this is still a bit clumsy, but we'll go with it for now. So I want to bring some of that red-orange that you would see at the top. I feel like I still need to fill the gaps a little bit. Then I'm going to move towards highlights. Okay, those fish, I will paint them in. The fish are the easiest to paint because they just become impressions. The thing with a sea turtle is if you don't paint it correctly, it looks wrong quite immediately. But the fish, because there's so many different types, and they move in many different angles, it's more forgiving. Okay, now I'm mixing white and lemon yellow and a little bit of warmth in just so that I can capture some of that light that is coming through the carapace. This is now back to the reflective light. So I'm always thinking which part of it is the reflective light, which is cooler, and which part of it is the direct sunlight. At some point, the scales here, the shapes of them, I'll have to draw them back in again. And it's quite important to get those sort of perspective shapes correctly again. I do that sometimes. I draw with my palette knife just to bring back some of those lines, just to make sure I'm not losing the perspective and the details, apart from the fact that I just enjoy the spontaneous marks as well while I'm painting. And this part of the sea turtle, that orange of the underpainting, is just about exactly the color and the values, the tonal values I'm after. If I can keep it open of that shining through, the better. This one had a bit of green moss on the back. There's a lot of light here, so it almost becomes a pure lemon yellow for that illusion of the moss that was growing on the back of the sea turtle that is in full sunlight. Because the sunlight is right here, it's quite close by, so there's quite a bit of direct sunlight coming from the top there. Here I'm back to the neutral gray a bit because it's the scales that are the parts that are facing away from the reflective light, so they're a bit darker again. Okay, I think I'm going to leave the turtle alone now. He's had enough attention for one moment. I think I'm going to move towards the top here now. Okay, so now I'm at the part where the light is coming in directly. So if you look from under the water, you look directly up, you'll see the sky coming through the water, which could be blue of the sky or white if it's overcast or so. But it's generally much lighter than the rest of what's happening under the water. And then when you move away, if you look a little bit further away, you then see any surface that might be reflecting from underneath again. And then if you move further down, it's the darkest part of the water that you'll see. So this part here that I'm doing, these almost become little waves because it's close, fairly close to the viewer. It's the closest part of this. So now I'm back to the phthalo blue, phthalo green. I use some burnt sienna to just mute it a little bit. Otherwise it becomes too garish, too strong. Because like I said, the phthalo blue is an incredibly strong pigment. You have to sort of be careful when you use it. So these are little sort of feeling of waves coming through. And I'm keeping some of that orange coming through, that undertone. It really is a lovely color for the direct sunlight. I'm going to just move a little bit with the brush over the fish so to soften them, because when I'm going to put colors over them, I don't want them to be too prominent. Otherwise they become the main focus, which is not what I want in this painting. What is quite nice is if I bring some of this blue from the color of the ocean into the part of the turtle that's further behind, it almost creates a sense of drama, that it is bigger. I'm bringing some of that watercolor just in here. There's also a time in the painting, just for myself, and I enjoy because of the spontaneous mark making, that I very spontaneously add some colors in. That is also why I have colored pencils. I would just randomly put them in, sketch them around. They serve no real purpose other than just keeping me, I think, spontaneous in what I'm doing and not fixed on detail or anything like that. It's part of the motion, the movement. When you paint them, they stand still in the painting, but in real life they never stand still. They're always moving, and it's that movement, that feeling that I want to capture. Once it has dried, it might be good just to darken this part just a little bit more, because it's lighter, bring it forward. I think it's a bit too wet to do this now. If it's dry, you can thin it right down with oil, with medium, and then it could sit over it. It just sort of gravitates, the bottom part, it just creates it, because if there's a darker area, it creates a focus, it creates more accent towards the light. I rely a lot on color mixing for this process, but when I'm drawing with a brush, I would just typically, if I need something dark, I could just pick up an ultramarine or the carmine red. I'm just drawing to get sort of the dark and light and the detail. There are also the size of the scales on the flippers. Different parts of the flipper, they've got different sizes. So if they move closer to the body, they are thinner. They move away on the edge, they become wider, and there's a claw. Typically, this one only has one claw. Some other species have got two. Yeah, so I'm just thinking of that as well at the moment. There's sort of a general ratio. I don't get too stuck on it, on getting that exactly right. It's more just about capturing that impression and generally knowing the ratio that they have, because otherwise you're going to get stuck in the detail, because there is actually so much detail on them with their scales, with the way these move. I'm using two thin brushes that I'm using to sketch in, and it really is, the one is dark for dark little lines, and the other one is for lighter little lines. You see, if I do that, now it starts to feel a little bit thick. So each different species of these sea turtles, all have got different characteristics, different shapes, amount of scales and things like that. And there was a time when I really studied that. At some point I wasn't sure if maybe I wanted to do scientific illustration of them. I studied all the different, really the anatomy, the movement of all these things, but at some point I realized, like, no, I'd rather want to create them as living organisms, as life forms that we can respect and see as also being important. I'm jotting in those lines. They may be a little bit strong, but for now, but they're okay. They help me with the definition. These are some of those markings. Okay, now I'm really just with a fish. I'm just using simple strokes in order to create their shape. Just the basic gesture of them. It's from a photograph I've taken of them just as they were swimming past, and they were quite close to the surface, so there's a lot of light that was on them, but then the underside's also quite dark. Yeah, so those are the basic shapes of them, and one was just jumping out there. And it's sort of a motion. What I like here is that then creates sort of a positive angle, and the fish almost creates or echoes that shape. Same with the water. There's a general compositional flow that I'd like to achieve in this one. I might come back and just add a bit more color, a little bit more yellow in there. So that's a bit of extra lemon yellow and the Scarlet Lake. So I tend to use only professional colors, the Langridge and the Art Spectrum. I like supporting the Australian brands, but there's one color in particular that I like, which is a student color, is the Scarlet Lake of the Winsor & Newton. Because it mixes so well with the white, it creates that real crisp white color that I've not yet found such a color in the other ones yet, at least for my application. What I'm going to start to do on a different photograph were the same fish but swimming further away. So then you're not really going to see the shadow part of them as you see here, but you'll only really see some of the highlight, and they're much softer. I'd like a school of fish to move behind softly in the background. So I have to think about the values and not make them too light so that they don't catch too much attention. But it's really just that color that I'm applying here in the darker area, and then it feels like there's soft light or light from far away under the water that is now sort of falling on them. With a finer brush, I will do their little tails, because typically that tail shape is what will help you read what direction this fish is swimming. And there's always an odd one going an odd direction or swimming its own way. So it just creates sort of just a feeling as if there's a few more. I'll have to do that a bit more carefully later, I think. With the finer brushes, I can pick up the same color and just do that. It's maybe a bit too big, that part, but yeah. Okay, so the painting has dried just a little bit, so it's a next section. So this enables me to take a little bit more control. The basic design is there, but I want to darken the water at the back, because that will mean that this bottom part of the turtle is brought forward. As the water is darkened at the top, I want to specifically look at the gradation of the water and the warmth that I want to create here. In this next section, I am going to use almost a glazing technique. It's about grouping the darks and grouping the lights. I'll be using that just to bring it together before I will then work on the details and finalize the drawing of the painting. So in this next section, what I mentioned before is the glazing technique. I'm mixing a lot more oil into the paint mixture, and I'm using a soft synthetic brush that I will use quite lightly over the canvas, and it's really just to create a little bit of darkness around. So I'm using it quite transparently. This part that I'm working with is more the phthalo blues, some burnt sienna, that just mutes it a little bit, the color, brings it a little bit softer, because otherwise it will end up being too purple, and that's not really what one wants. And the thing with water also is water is transparent, so this next section, it almost makes it feel like water now, because I'm using the paint in a transparent and translucent way. So by making the background darker, it enables the sea turtle that is really the main focus of the painting. All parts around the edges I can come back to at a later stage. What's also nice here is just the brushwork that feeling of brushwork that one can create with swift movements, create that feeling of movement. A little bit darker. The back of the sea turtle have some of that color of the water come through or go over that part, because it then feels like there's a bit of distance between the front and the back. Artists use that in all sorts of genres like science fiction and all sorts when they want to create a sense of drama and make something look really big. It's like a spaceship or whatever. In this case, it's really just about creating that feeling of size and proportion. Because ultimately, it's also about the difference between the main focus area and the smaller parts of the painting. And there's so many techniques that one can use in oil paint, and this is really just a technique that I've enjoyed over the years. So there's a lot of texture and movement from the layers or not so much the layers, but the marks that I've created in the first session, whereas now I'm working with transparent layers, and I'm just grouping that feeling of the water together. I tend to use the same brushes, one for dark colors and one for light colors, just while I'm working, so you don't have to clean them as you're working. So now I'm bringing in some of that warmth, a pale yellow. So the whole time in this section, I'm going to think about the light that is now flooding through the top surface. So there's a little bit of lemon yellow worked into this. And that color is very similar to that reflective light bouncing back at the bottom of the turtle shell. So I am going to use that same color in a transparent way. I'm still using it very transparently with this big widespread brush. It's very much a used brush, and in a way, at this point, I'm really just grouping the sections together. So there's almost a sense of volume that one can create. Okay, almost done with that. Some of those colors I can work in with a finer brush. I really enjoy working with palette knives, but something I also particularly enjoy is working with a fine brush, a very thin brush, and it's really to draw. Just because I'm one of those people that really enjoy drawing, it's really at the heart of what I do, even though I spend a lot of time painting. When I can sketch in with a brush, that's really, for me, quite a fun part of the process. So these are the little ripples in the water that is quite close to the viewer that I'm now painting in, just the bright side of it, the part of it where the sky is shining through. Sometimes you get a little bit of the blue from the sky in there as well, but it is typically lighter than the shadow parts of it that reflects back the blue of the water. One can be quite spontaneous with these. You just need to understand the basic nature of the shapes and what they're doing and how they extend and connect with each other. But you really don't have to paint them with exact accuracy. It's about that feeling of that light coming through and then that water reflecting back again. It reflects the color of the water, but at the same time, because it's right next to where the light comes through the water, it is also a bit lighter and a little bit warmer. So you won't be using that real green or purple color at the top of the water, because it's closer to where the light, the direct light source coming through. The thing about standing and painting, I think I've likened it before a bit to someone playing a violin or a musical instrument where you stand, because it also has to do with balance. When you sit and you paint, it's maybe a bit easier to balance yourself, but I like the motion of standing and painting, because it feels to me like that energy is easier to capture in your mark making. I mean, you can definitely create expressive work sitting down. I just love it to stand and be, it's quite a physical process. There's still a lot of white areas at the top of it that I'm almost wanting to close in a bit on, because it creates then a more concentrated feeling of the light coming through. So I'm in a way closing up the white areas and even the canvas, the orange of the canvas, in order to do that. Okay, I just want to extend a little bit of the darker turquoise higher up, because there's a feeling of the reflective light from underneath that I also want to show in the water, but I can't do it if it's too pale. So the light and the shadow continually working in harmony with each other. You need the one in order to create the focus of the other. I also have to be careful when I use a brush a lot, is that I don't make it look too labored. That's why I often come in with a palette knife to create that spontaneity, bring it back in again. And I think I'm going to do exactly that now. Just some spontaneous marks that I can soften or bring in again. I begin with the feeling of expressiveness when I prime the canvas and when I use a bit of gesso in order to build texture. All of that is sort of a reminder for me to say that I need to keep it spontaneous and loose. It's very easy to get stuck in the detail. This finer palette knife is something, one probably might very well be my favorite tool for painting, because over time I've managed to learn how to paint quite a certain level of realism with a palette knife, and delicacy as well. And because of the sharp point that I'll show there, because of the sharper point, you can actually work with significant detail. This is closer to the background color that I'd like to achieve. But because of the medium, it might well be very reflective now, which is not a problem at this point for me, because at the end of the day, I am going to create a satin varnish over it. So if certain areas are a little bit more shiny or glossy than other areas in the painting, it's fine for me. And finger smudging is also a very, very important part of the technique. I liken it almost to someone playing a piano and then pressing the mute pedal. That softens it, or if you put a mute on a violin, it softens the sound, and in a way that one can create as a painter as well. You don't want all the areas of the painting to be loud. Lemon yellow is an interesting color for using underwater. It can very easily make your blues look green, but a little bit of lemon yellow has this amazing ability to make it seem like there's light, by just adding a little bit to your grays. So I rely quite a bit on that underwater when I want to create that feeling. It just warms up the mixtures. And there are different yellows one can use in landscape painting and different types of painting. But for underwater painting, specifically lemon yellow is a wonderful color to achieve that. The color of water also changes quite significantly during the course of a day. So typically if there's sunrise and you're underwater, it tends to have a greener effect. And then around noon, in the middle of the day, it tends to be more blue. That's typically if there's sunshine. So sunshine tends to create that bluer effect in the water. Some of the fish that I painted in there, I've now painted over, because I'm more interested at this point in getting that water seeming as it should. I'm still just busy painting in the shadow part of the water surface, because there's so many facets as the water moves. point in various directions, and depending on that direction, it depends on whether it's reflecting in your eye the water underneath or the light coming through at the top. The shapes become flatter as it moves further away, because when you look up at it, you see more of the sort of the bigger shapes. As you look further away, they become flatter to your eye. So those shapes I'm drawing in are a bit flatter. I'm going to work on a bit of detail in the sea turtle again. I think there's the feeling of the water around it I'm quite happy with at this point. So now it's about drawing that back in again. With all that sort of loose brushwork, one can lose some of the drawing in the process. And that's, in a way, what I'd like to regain now. So I'm bringing some of that warmth in there that I mentioned are typical to the green sea turtle. Okay, so I'm really just in quite an informal way sketching in the detail. I try and get the marks to be fairly accurate when I put them down. Now, it's just that shape of the carapace at the top. And they've got little specks of color. The markings of every turtle is different. There's definitely some commonalities between the species, but each one has got its own visual characteristics. There's been moments where it's been quite obvious which one I've painted, because in the aquariums, if they've gone in rehabilitation, they've all have names. So some of the experts, the marine scientists, have sort of recognized some of them almost as portraits I've painted of them. They receive a name after they've been in rehabilitation for a little while. I don't know if it's in all aquariums, but in some of them at least, they don't give them a name if they've just come in and they're still unsure. If they're going to recover, they prefer not to give them a name because it becomes too emotional for the people who work with them. But when they look like they've recovered well enough, then they happily give them a name, and sometimes they stay for a while, and the people working with them grow quite fond of them because each one has got its own nature. There is a claw. I think it's just about here, a little claw. If it's a female, the claws are short and small. If it's a male, the claws tend to be longer. I know this one is a female. Yeah, so that's one of the, together with the length of the tail, how you recognize between the difference of a male or a female. When they're very small, you can't really tell the difference. And the claws also change. Some of them would have maybe 2 claws when they're young, and then as they mature, then the one claw sort of falls back into the body and they sort of lose it. But that one there, it's about there. Here, it's just outside the canvas, so I won't be drawing that in, but it will be roughly there. And I could render it maybe around it, but yeah. But that's roughly where they are. Sort of you learn these things by just spending time with them. And there's been marine scientists who have been incredibly generous with their time in showing me all these things and allowing me to spend time with them and staff at the aquariums. At some point it felt a bit like a laboratory for me, spending time at the aquariums, because I could paint directly from the exhibits. I could really observe it, and I'm not a scientist, but I would imagine it would be a bit like that, where you learn and you spend time and you see how something works and you try something else, and it's almost a bit like science experiments. There are these markings at the far side of the flipper, underneath the dark little patches on the front and the back flippers. So I'm just drawing those back in again. And they follow the shape of the scales, mostly, not entirely, but mostly. There's been times where I've been a little bit more careful with the size of these scales on the front flippers, but I'm not going to measure them out now because I don't have the time, but they are roughly that size. So these little darker patches just helps to anchor the painting. Okay, so now I'm thinking of the top of the scales because of the light that would be bouncing off the top part of them. And I'll do the same on the other side. Okay. This darker purple, it's a mixture of ultramarine blue and carmine red, just so that it remains nice and cool under the water. What I love about painting is that it's a very organic process, something that you cannot predict entirely how it will end up. And even though I've done it for so long, it's always difficult. You always have to concentrate. It doesn't become easier. Well, to some extent it does, but there's always have to concentrate on what you're doing. Let me leave it and see what happens. So that's a part of that back flipper that was in shadow, and the other part that has got the light coming through and shining at the back of it because it's sticking out behind the shell. Okay, I'm just darkening this bit just a little bit, and it's a bit warmer as well. Because I was thinking of the light reflecting when I painted the section, the light reflecting from the bottom, I'm now just needing to work in some of the midtones to make that light seem like light. There are little parts of the orange of the canvas shining through here at the bottom, and I don't really want much of that shining through at the moment because it's more the color of the direct sunlight, and that light is significantly softer underneath. So I'm just filling up those little gaps. A little bit more of that red, I think, in there. So just so to be like a mid-tone, just because of the type of turtle. Okay. Sometimes you go for a swift movement of a brush and then it just doesn't work, and you have to take it out in a way, scrape it off. So at the moment I'm just sketching in with a fine brush the little details, the directional lines that one would get. So it feels it's a little bit like drawing. But just the key thing would be to just make sure that the lines are, if you're drawing in such lines, that they're not too strong. Like that, exactly like that. That was a good illustration of what it should not be like. Okay. Bring some of that light back in again at the top. The thing is with painting something more than once is that you learn about their visual characteristics. It really helps when you paint something to have that confidence that you've seen it, you've looked at it, you've observed it. Because it's that matter of painting from life or photographs. If you learn the visual characteristics of something, whether you're painting from life, whether you're painting from photographs, you learn that, and it helps you with your interpretation I think I'm at a point where I need to be careful of not overdoing it. I think I'm going to leave that there for now. I'm going to move back to the fish. Oh, before I do that, there's one last little thing, sort of almost a cherry on the cake for me. It's just a part of the back of the carapace where there was light shining through. And in the first session, I painted it very prominently. But here, I'd like to do it a little bit more delicately. And then it goes in behind the leg. And it's just a part of it where it shines through, where the light shines through. And in that mixture, I've used some lemon yellow and white. Let's go back to where I intended to go. It's about hitting those values at this point if I paint like that. Really just making sure that they are the right. So this is in a way I'm painting in a bit of an abbreviated technique now. I'm thinking of the light that is shining through the fins of the fish. I'll have to come back and add a little bit of a darker line in there. These are somewhat strange looking fish. So it's just about getting their overall shape right. Okay, I'm going to leave that there. For now, I think that's fine. It's also just sometimes about just creating that impression of what it is. There's a little bit of light shining through the bottom of the fin as well, or the bottom fin, rather. The back of the fin is the thinnest part, so that's why I'm sort of starting with that, because that's the part where most of the light would transmit through. So, and then the front of the fin goes thicker and there's less light traveling through that. So I would typically just make it just a wee bit darker. I hope it's fine. Let's just darken that bottom part just a little bit, just so that you can get a sense of the edge, the bottom edge. There's a lot of reflection because these fish are silver as well. So there's quite a bit of light maneuvering and falling on them. Now I'm going to just paint a few smaller ones. So if they're further away in the water, then you'll have to mix in a bit more of the color of the water. So more of from that lemon yellow mixture that I had with white, I'll be mixing some more of the phthalo color in there now to create the feeling of distance. Just little areas of detail. If you have an idea of the general proportions of the fish, then one can sketch them in quite spontaneously. The first session I had some fish swimming behind. They're all mostly gone now, but I think I might just very lightly sketch some of them back in again, and it's really only the highlight. It's just an idea of some light falling on the top of them. One is just thinking about where the light might fall. Further away in water, you lose your ability to see shadows. So what then happens is you're only really seeing soft parts of the highlight. I have to be careful that I'm not painting them too strong. They have to be soft where they are. And it's quite easy with them if they're in a distance because they all change directions when they're painting as well. Okay, so I'm going to work at the top here. I'm not quite happy with that section there yet. A lot of white in there that feels a bit too much. I think what I'm going to do is add a bit of the blue of a sky that one would see, which is a different type of blue to the rest of the painting, which tends to be almost more the phthalo green, phthalo blue, combinations, broadly speaking. But if I add just white with a little bit of phthalo blue, it could read as the blue of the sky. And I think that might help a bit. Just to create a bit of dimension, I think that's what it's missing. Just too much white. I think this will be closer to the real thing. Yeah, that's already looking a little bit better. The sky will be at the very top of it, or the color of the sky would be at the very top of it, because that's now the part where you're looking up, almost looking right through the water. So what that blue also does is creates just a bit more of a mid-tone, just to break too much of that feeling of the white that I did. As I mentioned at the beginning, a little bit of Scarlet Lake with the white is really going to create that feeling of the white. Now I want to create those sections that are darker. That's almost this color, but just a little bit warmer, because that's what's bouncing back. So I'm just mixing in a little bit of the ultramarine, which is a little bit more purple, almost reddish type of blue compared to the phthalo. It might be that it's just a little bit too wet, it's starting to do what it should be doing. I think because I've mixed in quite a bit of white earlier in the session, it's in a way mixing in some of my darker areas now, I'm mixing in some of that white, so it's in a way going to be a little bit lighter than the blue at the bottom, deeper in the ocean. And this way of painting, one almost just invents, or you're just creating these shapes. I tend to follow, I may have put them down, and especially if I've worked with a palette knife, quite spontaneously, and then you get these marks that were at times intended and at times not really intended, and you can almost follow their design then if you work with water. So you almost just go with whatever shapes were being created. I think that is starting to look better. I'm almost just using ultramarine from the tube at this point, just because there's a lot of color already in there and wet paint, that they are influencing the marks I'm putting down in any way. So it is fine. They pick up those colors. I also realize I've worked with the brush quite a bit, and I can go back with a palette knife and mess it up a little bit. Now I'm just mixing in a bit of the carmine red, just so to add a little bit of red, otherwise it's too much green and blues. It adds to, from a distance, it creates a feeling of light. Even though this is a cool red, we read it as warmer or as light, let's put it like that. Because it's also possible to have too much of the greens and the blues, even though that's the majority of it. I have to be just careful of not putting in too much detail now in there, or too much movement of the brush. Might even be a good idea to smudge it just a little bit, just to soften it. An art teacher of mine many years ago taught me that every painting deserves a little bit of red. And I think it is just one of those colors that in large quantities it's overpowering, but I think in a scape, whether it's underwater or above water or so, it just really adds a little bit of energy and warmth. It's like one of those things you can go on and on with it, and at some point I'm going to have to call it a day, or just stop with the water. Because the water there's an infinite movement to it. It's different to when you're drawing something and there's an accuracy. With the water you have to try and just capture that feeling, and then maybe just leave it. I think what I'm going to do is just work in a bit of the palette knife. Okay, I think I'm now nearing the end. I'm just thinking of the shape that the light would take, the water, because there's a shape here, so it almost just sort of follows that flow. I think that's getting there. I still want to create more of that shape, that flowing lines I've been doing. I think it's getting perhaps a bit too wet now. I think that's the part I'm going to start finishing it off. I'm going to continually see things that I want to improve, but I think at some point you have to finish it. Okay. Okay, so I've just finished this painting, and it's of a green sea turtle swimming through the water. I love that motion of the carapace at an angle, but the head is straight, and it creates this positive motion. And that's what I wanted to capture with the darker background, the ocean leading up to the light coming through the water, with some of that fish that you see softly throughout the composition, but quite soft. And that's really just what I wanted to create, an impressionist painting with some expressive mark making. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. Okay.